Welcome to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. You can visit Dr. Johnson's blog at benwoodpost.com. Dr. Johnson's works can be found at drbenwoodjohnson.com. You can also support Dr. Johnson on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. Hey, welcome to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. Today is April 15, 2019, and this is podcast number 26. Tax day, everybody. I've already done my taxes, so this is one thing out of the way. Anyway, today we're going to have a great podcast. Today I am going to talk about a topic that is provocative. And, some of the materials that I've talked about, some of the issues that I've talked about so far in this podcast are related to philosophy, because this podcast is about, it's about sharing ideas, views that are philosophical in nature. And by that I mean I reflect on certain things, certain events in society which have an impact on everyday life. And today, the topic is censorship, and particularly silencing dissent. That's the name of the podcast. And what that means is that we're going to talk about how technology is used as a means to silence dissent, as a means to quell, to stifle, if you will, views that some entities in society deem unhealthy for society. Okay, so we are going to talk about the effect of silencing dissent, the effect of censorship, or how it could be detrimental for society as a whole. You might be wondering, why am I talking about this topic today? Well, I'm a bit fed up. And when I say fed up, I mean I'm sort of tired of having to deal with censorship, because I believe that my works are being censored on various platforms, and I'm tired of it. And then I think it is time for me to let these people know that I'm aware of what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, when you silence somebody's opinion, when you censor somebody's voice, you're not doing the world a service. You are not facilitating social discourse or civil discourse. So it is important to allow others to have a voice. And in my case, I believe that my works have been censored, and I'm just tired of it. I am tired of it. Anyway, without further ado, let us delve right into it. Censorship, silencing dissent. What do I mean by those terms? What do I mean when I say censorship? What do I mean when I say silencing dissent? Now, right off the bat, let me say that when I'm talking about censorship, I'm not talking about the traditional understanding of certain things that society as a whole agrees, or at least members of society as a whole, agree not to say in public. For instance, you could not sit in the middle of a crowd and shout out something that is going to cause a stampede, for instance. You couldn't be exerting your right of dissent to lambast, to disrespect, to attack other individuals. So when I am talking about censorship, I am not talking about those. Because to me, when we agree to live in a society, to evolve in a society, we also agree not to behave a certain way. And there are certain things that we could say, certain views or certain opinions that we could express, which could also cause harm to others. So in this case, I agree to the extent that there are certain things, there are certain limitations as to what can be said, how it can be said or could be said, when, where it could be said. So just to be clear, everything that I am about to say here is not in reference to that type of restriction. When I talk about censorship, what I am talking about is when you live in a society where people have opinions which are politically based. Those opinions could be intellectually based. And what do I mean by that is that the individual has a view of the world which is not necessarily the way the world is, rather it is an interpretation of the world. Okay? In other words, what you think you know about the world is not necessarily what I think the world is. Thereby, your view is political in nature or intellectual in nature, which means I have a right to dissent. I have a right to disagree with that view. Okay? And suppose you say the earth is flat. Now, of course, there are evidence to suggest the opposite. But let's suppose that's what you believe in. I have a right to recognize your right to believe this is the way the earth is. I don't have a right to criticize you for believing that the earth is flat. I also have a right, nevertheless, to refute that view. I have a right to dissent and to show you evidence if I have, and even if I didn't have evidence, but I still have the right. I would still have the right to disagree with your understanding of what the world is. And that's what I call dissent. Dissent is to refuse a view of the world that is not necessarily the view of the world. Therefore, it is not necessarily the ultimate truth about the world. Rather, it is somebody's understanding of what the world is. It could be a collective understanding of what the world is. The fact that you or a group of individuals happens to see the world with a particular lens, that does not make that view the truth. And if you were to take it upon yourself to prevent others from dissenting from that view, that's what I call censorship. Now, you could have a legitimate reason to censor somebody else or to censure somebody else. Okay? You could have a legitimate reason to say, you refuting my view is unacceptable. Therefore, I am not going to accept or allow you to say so or to do so. You could have that reason to do that. But that would not take away my right to do it. So when we're talking about censorship, whether or not you have a legitimate reason to censor or censure somebody, does not necessarily give you the ultimate right to take away somebody else's right. And that's where I think the debate should center. A few months ago, I was on Twitter, and somebody made a comment about, and I believe it was a comment about if you have nothing to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. I think the comment went along the line that if what you have to say is an opinion, you should not say it at all. And I responded to that individual by saying, well, you are missing the point. We are supposed to have different opinions. We are supposed to have diverging views about a topic, a subject, or anything. That does not make your opinion more important than mine. If I happen to see the world differently from you, does not necessarily mean that my view of the world is the view of the world. It does not necessarily mean that your view of the world is the view of the world. I have a right to disagree with you. And you have a right to disagree with me disagreeing with you. Now, whether or not what I am saying is my opinion of you, or what you're saying is your opinion of me, we both have a right to have that opinion. We both have a right to have that view. But when you take it upon yourself to prevent me from having that view, that's when we come into what we call dicey situations, where somebody is using his or her power to silence dissent. In the example of Twitter, I remember I was swamped. Within the hours, I was overwhelmed by comments of a lot of people who agree with that person and some other individual who disagree with me. And there was one particular comment in which a person referred to me as in a derogative way. I realized that I was in the wrong platform. So I didn't belong in this place, because I was under the impression that Twitter was a place where individuals could go and voice opinions. Of course, those opinions could have impacts on the real world. Therefore, there are consequences to saying certain things on Twitter. Nevertheless, the individuals still have the right to say those things. Okay? So I was amazed to find out that there are certain things that cannot be said on Twitter. Of course, this is a new trend in society these days, where opinions are suppressed, whether or not they are political opinions or they are social opinions. And there's a mob mentality where individuals are ready to jump on you if you have a view of the world that they don't agree. Okay? So I learned my lesson pretty quickly. So I immediately withdrew from Twitter. I'm not going to be a part of a mob. I'm not going to be looking for individuals who share my view and then go after those who don't. This is not who I am. But this paints a much larger picture about the state of our civility. The state of our civility is in a dire shape. There's no civility in the world these days. Perhaps the internet has something to do with it. As my previous podcast indicates, I don't necessarily believe that, because human beings have always been the way they are. Technology has only made it possible for them to be a certain way. But the fundamentals of the person has always been the same. Whether we're talking about the human being from the 19th century, from the 18th century, 17th century, we're talking about the same human beings. The way they use technology to behave themselves might be different, but the foundation of the individual has been the same. After all, we are human beings. Of course, this is a view of the world that some of you or some people might disagree. Okay? But the point here is this. The world has been turned into a place where, ideas that are different, views of the world that are different are unwelcomed. Unwelcome to a point where one could be affected in a very negative way for voicing a view of the world that some individual somewhere in the world happens to disagree with you. And I think this danger couldn't be more apparent, more prominent, when we're talking about powerful entities. What I've seen over the years is this idea that discourse has been turned into a weapon. Technology is weaponized. It's a weapon against ideas that are deemed too dangerous for the world. Of course, the reverse of that is true. Technology has been used as a way to insert ideas into the discourse which are not necessarily healthy for a society. Okay? There's this tendency. Certain individuals view themselves as the gatekeepers of knowledge, or as the gatekeepers of ideas, okay? And they have conducted themselves in such a way where they do not facilitate discourse. They become the silencers of discourse. They're there to suppress views of the world that they don't necessarily share. Now, it is important to point out that they have the technological means to do that. But there's a danger. Technology is evolving. There was a time when the internet did not exist. That did not stop the world from having views that most people didn't necessarily agree with. Because there's always a way for ideas to be disseminated, to be shared, to be viewed. And sometimes we don't have to disseminate ideas because we are human beings. More often than not, there are always clusters of individuals who see the world a certain way. So if one of them happens to be in the forefront of an idea, that does not necessarily mean that censoring that individual is going to stop that idea. All it does is that it gives that individual a reason to believe that that idea is the right idea of the world for him. Because the fact that you don't agree with that idea suggests that you see something in that idea that is dangerous to you. I personally have dealt with censorship of all kinds. needless to say that I am a black man in America. And not only that, I am an immigrant black man in America. So basically, I have the double curse or the double burden. So first, I'm a black man. Second, I am an immigrant. So the two things are sort of the perfect situations to be victimized by those who happen to view the world a way that you don't necessarily view the world. Now, that doesn't mean your view of the world is the best. It doesn't mean that their view of the world is the worst. All it means is that you happen to have a different view of the world. When I came to America, I was in my early 20s. Right now, I'm in my mid-40s. This is to tell you, when I came in this country, I already had a view of the world, which America couldn't change, because I had an understanding of my world, of the world, which being in America could not change. So, being in America was an opportunity for me to see and to hear, to understand other people's viewpoints. Over the last 2 decades, this is precisely what I've been doing. I have been listening, watching, reading. I have also witnessed a certain intolerance in terms of how people acknowledge other people's view of the world. I have seen this intolerance, this incapacity to accept that others may have a view of the world that does not necessarily reflect your view of the world. There's a certain insecurity in this world. The insecurity stems from the fact that people are so sensitive about what they think about the world. They're afraid that somewhere or somehow somebody might change their view of it, of their world. And they're afraid of that. And that sense of insecurity creates an instability in the way people view themselves in relation to others. Back in the days of Jean-Paul Sartre, the individual could objectify you with a look. Nowadays, a look is not enough to objectify the other. The objectification of the other is more profound than that. The objectification of the other sometimes reflects the way you treat the other, the opportunity you provide the other, the significance you allow the other in terms of who the other is, where the other comes from, how the other speaks, how the other thinks. And the objectification of the other could be seen through these many mechanisms of society in terms of the opportunities that are there for the other. When the other faces a situation where his capacity or ability to be is restricted to a point where even his views of the world is unaccepted or is refuted, then the other is objectified. And the other becomes this object where the other has absolutely no humanness, which the other, or the one who objectifies the other, must or should acknowledge. And that's the danger of censorship. And that's the danger of silencing dissent. Because on the one hand, what you are doing is that you're telling the other you do not have a voice. Or perhaps your voice has absolutely no relevance to my reality, which might be the case. Because the other might have a view of the world that does not reflect your reality, at least from your perspective. But that does not negate the fact that the other might have a view of the world that does not reflect your reality. And the mere fact that the other has a view of the world that may or may not reflect your reality is not reason enough to silence the other's view of that world. Because when you do that, you are not only silencing the other, you are also dehumanizing the other. Thereby, you are removing the other's inherent capacity to be, to assess the world within and without, or the world that the individual is evolving into. So you are effectively telling the other you are an object. Therefore, you have absolutely no relevance. Objects don't speak. Objects don't think. Objects don't have a voice. At least a voice that we could acknowledge. Objects are just inert. And that state of inertia is what makes them objects. But it is also what separates object from human beings. Because human beings are not in a state of inertia. Human beings are constantly evolving. They are constantly thinking about themselves. They are constantly thinking about the world. And they're trying to make sense of themselves in the world. And that ability to self-imagine, to self-envision, to self-wondering, self-questioning, if you will, that's what makes a human being, and that's what separates a human being from an object. When you decide to take away a person's voice, you are effectively dehumanizing the other and thereby rendering the other an object. You, by that action, which is silencing dissent, you are turning the other into an object. At least you are forcing the other to become an object. Humanity was not designed to be that way. Like I said in the beginning of this podcast, human beings have always found a way to be. There's always been technology. There's always been new inventions. And there's also been ways for people to find a way to voice themselves. Because accepting to be silenced by another is accepting the other to take away your humanity. And the human being was not designed to give away his or her humanity just because the other wants it or wants him to, okay? It is against the nature of the human being. The immediate problem is that censorship, silencing dissent, create more instability. If you feel insecure in yourself because somebody may have a view of you that you don't approve, silencing that individual only make it worse, because now your behavior reinforces the other's view of you and perhaps revealed more than you would have ever let the other know about you. Okay? Because now the other is more attuned to you. He's watching you, how you do, why you do, and how you proceed in doing. Okay? And I think a lot of people believe somehow they are Superman. So wherever they're sitting on a throne somewhere, they're God themselves, little gods, mini gods. So whatever they do, they get to do. And the consequences of that action is sort of like, I did it and there's nothing you can do about it. And for the most part, that's true. Okay? For the most part, there are individuals who sit on a throne somewhere and they do certain things to you, to your family, or to you personally, and there's nothing you can do about it. At least there's nothing tangible you could do about it. Of course, going back to the Sartrean approach to the human existence, Sartre would probably argue that you are still free to emancipate yourself from that situation. That's what Sartre would say. So you could still remove yourself from that environment and refuse to be subjected or refuse to be objectified by the other. Okay? That is what the Sartrean approach would be. But I would have a different take on that. I believe when we live in a society that is so secluded, the way society is secluded, I believe when we live in a world where that is so ordered, controlled, contrived, the way this world is controlled and contrived, sometimes it is nearly impossible to stop the other from objectifying you. And perhaps the best, or perhaps the only solution, is to objectify the other in the same way. Okay? Let us say that Twitter decides to censor you or censor you. What are you going to do? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to censor you. Is that what you think Twitter's going to say? No, not at all. Because Twitter is censoring you because Twitter thinks you have a view of the world that's not healthy for them. Now, of course, some people could try to explain that saying, well, it's business. That has nothing to do with business. Or if it has something to do with business, the foundation of that business is still this political understanding of the world, which drives the business in itself. So it's not necessarily business. There's always this political view of the world that the other simply doesn't want you to have. Whether that view is going to benefit him or her, it's irrelevant. What's important is that the other might see your view of the world in a way that is not good for him. In terms of what is it that the person is trying to get out of the world. So you calling Twitter and say, hey, Twitter, I think you're censoring me. Twitter has absolutely nothing to do about it. Twitter is going to do nothing about it. Perhaps your best option is for you to get out of Twitter. That's your best option. Your best option is not for you to try to be on Twitter and forcing Twitter to speak for you or to give your voice. Because the more you're going to ask Twitter to give your voice, the more they're going to take that voice away from you. Their objective is to objectify you, to silence you, turn you into an object which has no voice, dehumanize you, take away your humanity. So your best way to fight is to get out of Twitter. Get out. Take away Twitter's voice in your life. And in that sense, I agree with Sartre. To some extent, you still have the power to stop the objectification of the other. Okay? But sometimes it is not possible. Let's take Google, for instance. Today, the way the world is structured is that you need Google to do almost anything. Google rules the world in terms of internet searching. It's like Google is a highway. It's a super highway where everywhere you need to be, everywhere you need to go, you have to pass by Google. See? So Google has the key to every road you could envision in this world. It's not necessarily because you want to be on the internet. It's just like the world, the way it is structured today, as of now, you have to have access to Google. And if you're trying to build yourself on Google, on the Google platform, you need to have a voice. You need to have the opportunity to be heard, because that's where everybody is going to be to listen to you. If your voice is not on Google, you do not have a voice. So Google has the power to objectify you to a point where even if you wanted to stay away from Google, you would thereby objectify yourself, because you would be taking away your own voice. And that's the danger of silencing dissent. That's the danger of censorship. Is when the entity who has the means to allow the other to be has decided to politicize that means. And to give you a trivial example, if I wanted to have an audience, back in the days I wanted to speak the gospel. Let's say that I read the Bible and there was a passage in the Bible I wanted to speak to my fellow, to my friends about, right? I would go to church. But if, for instance, the pastor didn't want to give me an opportunity to speak to the audience, I still had the opportunity to find myself in the town square. I'll be standing on the town square with my Bible in my hand and be telling my view of the gospel to the people. Of course, when I would be shouting in the middle of the town square, some people would ignore me completely. But one of them would stop by and pay attention to what I have to say. So to translate that analogy in the real world, in the modern world today, you no longer have that opportunity. The minute Google decides to censor you, to stop you from having a voice on their platform, you have none whatsoever. And you have thereby becoming an object to the world, for the world, and to Google effectively. Now, at this point, you might be asking, well, what are you proposing? what solution do you envision for this cataclysm, if you will? I believe it is still important to have a voice, but you need to limit that voice to those who might be interested in it. Perhaps your most important listeners or your friends, whom do not necessarily have to be on Google to listen to you. Perhaps your most important listeners are your parents, your family members, okay? These individuals do not have to be on Google to listen to you. And I understand it's tough because, the livelihood of a man is almost, I'm not going to say 100%, it is at least 90% dependent on the internet right now. There's nothing a man can do or could do that is relevant, but let me use the word relevant, without going through the internet. Even if you were a nobody, at least as per the definition of those who think that they are somebody, even per that definition, you still have to be on the internet to have a voice, to be heard, or at least to hear others speaking, because in doing so, you are able to know that you exist as a person. Because believe it or not, sometimes being on the internet reinforces your view of the world. The fact that so-and-so has that view. The fact that that person sees the world the way you do. The fact that that person dresses the way you do. That person speaks, walks, and be in this world the way you are. It gives you a voice. You don't have to have a voice per se directly. That voice can simply be the fact that you have access to those who have a voice. That gives you a voice. And when Google decides to silence views that it deems dissenting, it takes away you, but it also takes away the other. And that's a danger for the world. That's a danger for the future of humanity. And I believe we ought to step back and try to understand what is it we're doing. We are misusing technology. We are misusing our power. The power to be. Because that power, the technology gives us the power to be in a certain way that perhaps our fathers didn't envision. But we still have the opportunity to be. This is our generation. This is our reality. We're not living in the ages where no one had electricity. We're not living in the ages where being in the town square was the best way to communicate one's message. The age we're living today is the age of the internet. And because it is the age of the internet, we should never allow an entity, whether it is Google, Facebook, or whichever it might be, to have the power to decide when we are as individuals. We should never give these people this power to decide our humanity. Because when they decide to stifle our voice, they are also taking away our humanity. And when we become devoid of humanity, we don't see each other as human beings. And when we don't, we have to ask ourselves this question: what is the purpose of society if we are going to live as animals in a place that was designed to be different from the jungle? So when we allow these entities to stifle our voice or to silence our dissenting views, we allow them to objectify us. And in doing so, we allow them to take away our humanity. And when they take away our humanity, it's just a matter of time. And it becomes a cycle where we as entities, we've sort of lost our values. We've sort of lost our humanity, our humanness, if you will. It is never good to dehumanize others. Because when you dehumanize the other has no option but to dehumanize you. And as a society, we cannot allow that cycle. If we allow the world to become a place where people get to take away others' humanity on the basis of a view, an opinion that they have that they don't agree, then we are heading toward chaos and civility. So it is important for us, as a people, as a species, to rethink our understanding of who we are. who we are supposed to be, where we are supposed to be, and how we are supposed to be. It is not up to X, Y, and Z to decide who we are or whom we should be. It is not up to them to make that decision for us. And I think this is the danger of silencing dissent. This is the danger of censorship.